At 3 in the morning, the kitchen is still moving. Coffee is pouring, eggs are hitting the grill, and plates are crossing the counter. Behind it all is Archie Delaportis, who came to America from Greece at just 16 years old and spent decades working at the Bel Air Diner in Astoria, Queens, Jersey. His family described a life built around the restaurant, where long hours were simply part of the deal. To customers, it looked like an ordinary American diner, but behind that counter was a story that began thousands of miles away in Greece and would eventually become part of the story of American food. So how did Greek immigrants from a relatively small Mediterranean country become so deeply connected to America's restaurant culture? And how did they change what the country ate? Welcome to World Citizens, where we uncover the hidden stories of communities that cross borders and quietly reshape the world around them. If you enjoy stories about immigration, culture, business, and the people behind the changes we often take for granted, subscribe to World Citizens, like this video, and join us for the journey. The story begins with Greek immigrants arriving in America with little money, limited English, and few easy paths into the economy. Between 1890 and 1921, roughly 421,000 Greeks came to the United States, settling largely along the East Coast and in cities such as Chicago, Detroit, and Pittsburgh. For many, restaurants offered an accessible path because they required relatively little startup capital and didn't demand perfect English. Many first entered the food business through confectionery shops, selling sweets and refreshments. But when that industry declined during the 1920s, some owners transformed their shops into lunchrooms and eventually full restaurants. A small candy shop could become a coffee shop, then a lunchroom, and eventually a restaurant capable of supporting an entire family. And that family became the real advantage. One immigrant found work, then brought a cousin, a brother learned to cook, a wife ran the register, children waited tables after school. Relatives learned the business from one another, reducing labor costs and creating a pipeline into ownership. Over time, Greek immigrants were not simply working in restaurants, they were building a network that could reproduce itself. By the post-war decades, Greek families were increasingly buying diners from retiring owners and turning these businesses into family enterprises. The restaurant became more than a place to make a living. It became a way for one generation to bring the next into America. But if hard work alone explains the story, why did Greek immigrants become so deeply associated with American diners in the first place? The answer was not just the willingness to work long hours, it was the network behind the counter, the family members, relatives, and community connections that allowed the business model to spread. And that network would eventually help Greek Americans become one of the most visible immigrant groups in America's restaurant industry. But there was a twist hiding inside that success. The more Greek immigrants succeeded in American diners, the less Greek many of those diners became. And that raises a much bigger question. If Greek-owned diners often succeeded by serving more American food and less Greek food, then how did Greek cuisine itself ever become part of everyday American life? The answer begins with something that sounds simple but was incredibly powerful: family. Greek-owned restaurants often operated on a model that required everyone to contribute. The father might be cooking, the mother working the register, and the children waiting tables after school. There was no need to build a large payroll when the family itself could keep the business running. And because relatives already trusted one another, the next worker was often only a phone call away. A Greek immigrant could arrive in America, find work in a restaurant, learn the business, and eventually bring someone else into the same system. The restaurant became a ladder, and the people climbing it were often connected by blood, marriage, or village. After World War II, this network increasingly moved into the American diner business. As older Jewish and Irish diner owners retired, Greek families were among those willing to take over businesses that demanded long hours and relentless work. The opportunity was hiding in simple sight. The diners were already established, the customers were already there, and the new owners didn't have to invent the business, they simply had to keep it running. For immigrants willing to work from early morning until late at night, that was an opportunity worth taking. Over time, the pattern became so widespread that one author estimated that by 1989, roughly 20% of National Restaurant Association members had Greek surnames. This figure is an author's estimate, not an official count, but it captures the scale of a community that had become remarkably visible in American food service. And the pattern didn't stop with diners. In Connecticut, Greek Americans became particularly prominent in the pizza business, another restaurant category that rewarded family labor and long hours. By 1990, they were reported to dominate the state's pizza industry. From diners to pizza shops, the same underlying formula kept appearing. One family learns the business, another relative joins, and eventually the knowledge passes to the next generation. But this is where the story takes an unexpected turn, because the success of Greek immigrants in American restaurants did not necessarily come from bringing Greek food to America. In fact, before the 1960s, many Greek-owned diners that served Greek communities could offer genuinely Greek dishes, but these restaurants were often tied to the neighborhoods around them. American cities were still divided by ethnicity, and restaurants naturally served the people who lived nearby. If you were in a Greek neighborhood, Greek food made sense. But then the country changed. Cars gave Americans the freedom to drive farther for dinner, and suddenly a restaurant could no longer depend only on the people living around the corner. The customer base became wider, and the menu had to change with it. Greek diner owners adapted by making their restaurants less ethnic and more broadly American. Burgers, eggs, pancakes, sandwiches, steaks, and an enormous variety of familiar dishes became the language that could attract almost anyone. In one documented case, a Greek diner owner who had opened her restaurant in the 1950s with a full Greek menu had, decades later, removed almost everything Greek except one surviving item, the Greek salad. The irony is striking. Greek immigrants became deeply associated with the American diner, partly by making the food less Greek.
So the story is not simply that Greek immigrants brought Greek food into America. In many diners, the opposite happened. Greek ownership spread into one of America's most recognizable food institutions, while much of the Greek food itself disappeared from those very same restaurants. And that leaves us with a mystery. If the diners that Greek immigrants became famous for were often serving American food, then where did Americans actually discover gyros, souvlaki, spanakopita, and the other dishes that would eventually become familiar across the country? The answer lies somewhere else, and it would take a different kind of Greek restaurant to bring Greece to the American table. While Greek-owned diners were adapting their menus to attract the widest possible audience, dedicated Greek restaurants continued serving the food immigrant families had brought with them. They offered grilled meats, seafood, pastries, and traditional dishes that were still unfamiliar to many Americans. By the 1930s, Greek-American cuisine had become recognizable as its own category of restaurant food, slowly creating a separate path for Greek food to reach the American public. Then came one of the most recognizable Greek foods in America, the gyros. But even here, the story isn't as simple as finding one person and declaring them the inventor. The exact origins of the gyros' arrival in America remain debated. One account credits Chicago restaurateur George Apostolou with introducing the dish at his Parkview restaurant in 1965, but that claim is not universally established. What is clearer is that gyros and souvlaki became increasingly familiar through dedicated Greek restaurants and street food style stands, particularly during the 1970s. As more Americans became interested in foods from different cultures, dishes that once seemed foreign began appearing in ordinary neighborhoods. You no longer had to live in a Greek community to encounter Greek food. You could walk into a restaurant, order a gyros, and slowly begin to see it as something that belonged in America. And that creates a strange contradiction at the heart of the Greek-American restaurant story. The diners helped Greek immigrants become deeply embedded in American food culture, but many of those diners succeeded by becoming less Greek. At the same time, the restaurants that openly celebrated Greek cuisine were quietly carrying that food into the mainstream. One side spread Greek ownership, the other spread Greek food, and together they created an influence that neither path could have achieved alone. But there was another problem waiting for the families who had built this entire system. The old Greek restaurant model began facing pressure from rising costs, changing customer habits, delivery platforms, labor shortages, and a new generation that often wanted a different life. Some family restaurants disappeared. Others survived only because someone decided to carry the tradition forward for another generation. Yet by then, something much larger had already happened. Greek immigrants had entered American food culture so deeply that their influence was no longer easy to separate from the culture itself. They built diners where millions of Americans ate breakfast. They created family businesses that connected one generation to the next. They helped make Greek salads familiar, turned gyros into a mainstream fast food option, and introduced foods that once seemed foreign to people who had never tasted them before. So perhaps the most important part of the story is not that Greek immigrants opened restaurants. It is what happened after those restaurants became ordinary. A Greek salad stopped feeling foreign. A gyros became a normal lunch. A Greek-owned diner became simply an American diner. The immigrant influence was still there, but the label slowly disappeared. And that may be how immigrant communities change a country most powerfully, not by replacing what was already there, but by becoming so deeply woven into everyday life that eventually people forget the food was ever considered foreign at all. That is how Greek immigrants changed American food forever.